Good morning, folks. Welcome back from the mother city of Cape Town here in South Africa. A year ago, the Episcopal Church withdrew from the U.S. refugee program. Now, this was a devastating decision. Their contract was up for renewal and they chose not to seek to renew it. Why is it devastating? Because the Episcopal Church was the single largest provider of refugee relocation services in the United States. Their decision to withdraw from the program left the Office of Refugee Resettlement with a greatly diminished capacity to receive refugees. Now, the reason for leaving wasn't dissatisfaction with the money that they've been grubbing off the U.S. taxpayer for years, settling people we didn't ask to settle in our neighborhoods without our consent or our permission. No, their anger was because they're a bigoted and arguably racist organization masquerading as a bunch of Christians. That's right. If you're Episcopalian, it hurts your feelings. Get over it. Your church at the national level said they would not help South African refugees because they supported Archbishop Desmond Tutu during the apartheid era. So what? What does that have to do with the price of tea in China? Not a damn thing. The ignorance, the bigotry, the outright racism directed against South Africans, many of whom are not even white, by this so-called Christian church, is nauseating. I said so last year, and now we have an instance from a public report out of Vermont stating that a local church there, St. Michael's in Brattleboro, Vermont, will not help South African refugees. These are Christians? No. These are bigots disguised as Christians, welcoming Muslims and people from the third world into our Christian communities while ignoring the plight of Christians because of their bigotry and racism and their historical ignorance, trapped on April 27th, 1994, ignorant of the world around them. Vermont is expected to resettle up to 100 Afrikaners, except that's a lie. It will resettle 100 South Africans, some of whom are Black, some of whom are colored, and some of whom are Indian. Now, this is according to Tracy Dolan, the state's refugee office director. Dolan said, "We're going to welcome people regardless of the political environment in which they arrive. It's not up to us to define a refugee." That is correct. But according to the racist Episcopalian Church, it is up to them to define a refugee. And we'll hear more from one of the spokesmen from this racist church in Brattleboro. Now, according to Dolan, 50 South Africans have already arrived, and another 50 are expected in the next 2 months. Adding fuel to the fire, U.S. Representative Becca Balint of Vermont said the Trump policy effectively shut the door on refugees fleeing war, political persecution, and humanitarian catastrophes in places like Sudan, Afghanistan, and Haiti, as they streamline the process for one favored group. Well, the South Africans are fleeing religious, political, and racial persecution. So what is this idiot's problem? And one favored group? Arguably Muslims and people from the developing world who are not white, European descent, have been favored for decades under the refugee program. Virtually no refugees have come from Europe in the past 50 years. That dried up. So who's favored here? For years, over 3 million people were poured into our country through the refugee program. The favored people are the non-white, largely non-Christians who poured into our country, with the exception of the Ukrainians. Now, Becca Balint is U.S. representative for Vermont's at-large congressional district. What kind of at-large? What the hell is that? This isn't South Africa. At-large? What kind of state has an at-large position? You have a district. She took office on January 3rd, 2023. She's a Democrat, a former middle school teacher, and is the first openly LGBTQ plus person to represent Vermont in Congress as a woman. Whoop-de-frickin-do. That is not an accomplishment, being a lesbian in Congress. Are you impressed by that? That's an accomplishment? No. That's a choice. That's a sexual orientation, not an accomplishment. Wow. First woman LGBTQ openly member. There have been plenty of lesbians and gay men serving in Congress. Who gives a flip? Her committee assignments include the Committee on Oversight and Accountability, the Committee on Budget, and the Committee on the Judiciary. Now, that's frightening. This bigot, this uninformed fool from Vermont who sits in Congress, sits on the committee that oversees the judiciary. That's pretty frightening. Now, Joe Wia, executive director of the Ethiopian Community Development Council, which is the local refugee assistance agency there, says, "We don't get to pick and choose. We continue to serve people regardless of whatever political changes there are." Now, that's the correct answer by Joe. Mr. Wia said it correctly. Very good that he said that. I don't know if he said it because it's true sentiment, or because he knows that's what he needs to say. Whatever the case is, it's a correct message. Now, Wia said he had to lay off about half his staff due to cuts the Trump administration made to federal programs. That's what I told you all last year. And I've told you ever since, one of the reasons why the pace of South Africans going to the United States is slower than many people expect is absorptive capacity, because these agencies had to make most of their workers redundant. They were no longer receiving money from the gravy train of the U.S. taxpayer of $8.9 billion per year to resettle people in our neighborhoods without our consent, without our approval, without any effort to even acknowledge that we are the residents, the indigenous population of the country. So these agencies get $9 billion a year. And that would dry it up last year on January 20th. So Mr. Weah had to lay off half of his staff. He said the flow of refugees, once again bringing families to southern Vermont, means he can keep his doors open. Now, wait for this. The bigoted, racist Episcopal Church refuses to help South Africans because they're bigotry and racism, and they harm all refugees, which is what I said last year. The behavior of this church is disgraceful. It's unbelievable. It's shocking. It's not shocking. So many fake Christians who coat themselves in the Bible and attend church and claim that they're genuine Christians fail to show charity for their fellow Homo sapiens, and even worse, for their fellow Christians. Mr. Weah said he can continue to serve the 500 or so refugees who have arrived since 2021. This includes people from Afghanistan, Sudan, and Venezuela. And that is the point I wanted to make, is that by Trump sending refugees, they're receiving funding. These grant monies that come to them are for their operations, for the refugees they have. So they'll continue to receive money. But those who opt out of the program, like the Episcopal Church, which is bigoted and possibly racist, don't get that money anymore. And they can't help any of the refugees that are already in the country who are supposed to get assistance for 3 to 5 years, depending on the type of service. That's right, 3 to 5 years. From that St. Michael's Episcopal Church in Brattleboro, Vermont, Paul Gallagher has been helping lead a group of volunteers working through the St. Michael's Episcopal Church in Brattleboro. But he says the group will not be working with South Africans. He'll code his bigotry against South Africans in rational language. Listen to what he had to say. Gallagher said the Brattleboro group is not helping the South Africans largely because they have fewer needs. Apparently, they don't eat and drink. They don't need shelter. They don't need succor. Apparently, they must not be refugees, according to this clown. He said they speak English and are more comfortable with the Western culture than many Afghan families had to learn to navigate. Well, your job as a refugee resettlement agency and as a volunteer helping refugees is not to make people comfortable. It's to help them with their needs. That is your role. And obviously, as a bigot, you don't understand that. For some reason, you want to flood Vermont full of Afghans, many of whom have no business being in America. They were loaded on planes and not vetted and sent to America. Many do have a business being in America. Many don't. With people who are actually properly vetted. Christians from South Africa largely. A few Muslims, mostly Christians. But you've got bigotry against that. They speak English. Apparently, this bigot doesn't know much about the South Africans. Most of them speak English only in self-defense. Their English standard is not very high. I've met Congolese who speak English better than some Afrikaners, for example. But then he exposes his genuine sentiments as a bigot or perhaps even as a racist. If you look at the picture of the South Africans in the airport and their luggage, it doesn't look like what we saw in the airport when refugees came into Manchester, New Hampshire. If everything else stayed the same, their needs would not reach the level that of other refugees. I really doubt if it were a level playing field that they would have made the cut. So this Paul Gallagher, who doesn't know anything about what he's talking about, thinks they wouldn't make the cut as refugees. Obviously, he doesn't understand the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1980 or what political or racial persecution is. Apparently, racial persecution is only if you're brown or black or if you fled from a war. Apparently, that's the only definition of what a refugee is, according to these idiots in the Episcopal Church and this volunteer, Paul Gallagher. They need to open a dictionary and go read what these words mean. Then they need to go read the U.S. Immigration and Nationality Act of 1980. The South Africans are better vetted than anyone in recent history because the government is now actually obeying the law, following the rule of law and vetting these people properly, which has not been done for years, including the previous Trump administration, certainly under Biden and Obama. So for these idiots to make such bigoted comments from their ignorance is disturbing. I'm ashamed to call this person American and a Christian. Gallagher said the group is continuing to work with a number of Afghan families who previously resettled in the area, many of whom are still adjusting to new lives. No Afghans have come to America for nearly 2 years, except for 3 that went to Colorado. So here are these bigots, these racist Christians, so-called Christians in Brattleboro, Vermont, helping Afghans, Muslims who came to this country over 2 years ago, continuing to help them while ignoring the plight of destitute, poor, white, brown, and black South Africans who come from South Africa and have no hope and no future in this country because of racial persecution, abuse, assault, and denial of employment because of their skin color. You could not become more racist and more bigoted than these clowns in Brattleboro, Vermont. Shame on you all. Shame on you all. I will be knocking on your door on my trip to Vermont. I doubt you'll welcome me in because you're not real Christians. Shame on you. This is a disgrace to America. This is a disgrace to Christianity. And it's not a surprise because the Episcopal Church is a bunch of bigots who don't understand history and try to pull out the Desmond Tutu card to explain their bigotry and hatred towards South Africans, picking on toddlers and 5-year-olds and 15-year-olds for actions that people took 50 years ago. None of these people had anything to do with it by and large. It's sick, it's twisted, and it shows you just what kind of woke, retarded, leftist, idiotic, uninformed bigots and racists we unfortunately do have in America. What say you, South Africa, Mzansi? Have a blessed day. From a real Christian, not pretend Christians in Brattleboro, Vermont. I have empathy for Christians, Muslims, Jews, animists, Buddhists, all Homo sapiens, not just the ones that I favor because they're brown and Muslim. That's going to piss some people off. Good. It should.